The DLOCLeAPS workbook includes a panel designed to help develop, consolidate, and manage questions for the interviews. We can access that panel with this button labeled Develop Interview Questions and Conduct Interviews. The Interview Questions panel lists all the CMMI Dev process areas in the DLOC default sequence, along with their goals and practices here on the left. This is a static, unchanging sequence. These access buttons here at the top and to the right are easy ways to get to a process or practice of interest. They're also displayed in the DLOC default sequence, read left to right, and this is also a static presentation. The process area blocks over here on the far upper right are in the actual presentation sequence we established in the sequencer. These PA blocks will turn green as the PA's affirmations are recorded and the block is completed, except for PAs that are out of scope. They are grayed out and will remain so. The goals and practices areas of the out-of-scope PAs are also grayed out over here on the left. Interview questions appear in this column, labeled Interview Questions View, Standard and Appraisal Specific, and consist of two types of questions. Standard questions, that is, generic questions that can be developed and maintained by the lead appraiser for use on any and all appraisals if desired, and questions from the appraisal team members, which will be specific to the appraisal in progress. To develop and maintain the standard questions, the lead appraiser would click here on the button labeled Edit Standard Questions. This opens an edit view with the familiar buff-colored data entry cells. Add, delete, or modify questions in the edit view, then exit the edit view to update the interview questions view. You can see your added question here. The appraisal-specific questions come from the interview questions columns in the PA tabs. These questions, the appraisal-specific questions, are loaded in the interview questions panel when the mini-team inputs are synced with the master workbook, or when you click this button labeled Refresh the Interview Questions View. You might use the Refresh Interview Questions button if there have been updates to the questions in the PA tabs since the master workbook was last synced with the ATM inputs. Questions brought in from the PA tabs will be tagged with the related PA in practice, as well as the applicable BU or SG. If you develop new or modified standard questions, and you plan to use them in future appraisals, you can set your updated standard questions view as the default, not individually but as a whole, using this button labeled Set Standard Questions as Default. That way, when you launch a new workbook for a new appraisal, your new view of standard questions will already be on board. This applies to the deletion of standard questions as well. So, With this regard, it would likely be a useful practice to make sure you separate your standard questions, that is, likely questions for any and all appraisals, from the appraisal-specific questions. Keep your standard questions in the standard or generic questions view, and your appraisal-specific questions in the PA tabs. That way, when in the conduct of an appraisal you develop a pithy new generic question, you can confidently add it to your default question set without pulling in questions that were peculiar to the appraisal at hand. Now, as you go through the interview questions, you can record that an affirmation has been made with this pull down, which has only the choice of A for affirmation or blank. As your interviews progress, you'll be able to monitor status through this chart up here in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. The appraiser can use the affirmation pull-down when an affirmation regarding the practice in question is deemed to be given. The notes section can be used to record or characterize the affirmation. Another view of progress is provided in the affirmations quilt, accessible through this button labeled View IQ Affirmations Quilt. Here, IQ stands for Interview Questions. Interview questions for which affirmations have been recorded in the Interview Questions tab will be shaded blue in the quilt. It may seem that this button might just as well be labeled simply View Affirmations Quilt, but the point is to highlight that the quilt only reflects the affirmations recorded here in the Interview Questions tab. Another view is provided by the Affirmations tab. That's Affirmations period, which is accessible through this button labeled Go to Affirmations. The Affirmations tab presents both the affirmations recorded in the Interview Questions tab, in this row, for example, in the Project Planning area, this row labeled LAIQ for Lead Appraiser Interview Questions, and the affirmations recorded in the PA tabs. Affirmations recorded in the PA tabs are reflected here in the rows above the LAIQ row and are displayed against the applicable BU or SG. If desired, you can restrict the view to only the affirmations recorded in the Interview Questions tab, with this button labeled View LAIQ Only. Or return to the previous view with this button labeled View In-Scope Projects, BUs and SGs, and the LAIQ. Navigating the Affirmations tab is the same as in the Interview Questions tab, using these buttons labeled with the process area mnemonic abbreviations listed in DLOC default sequence. On the Interview Questions tab, you can automatically create and email a distribution copy of the interview questions to the ATMs if you have Microsoft Outlook on your machine. Click this button labeled Create and Email Distro Copy to ATMs. The system produces an email to the appraisal team members with a subject of Interview Questions - Customer Short Name, and with body text advising that the interview questions are attached. It attaches a file named Interview Questions - Customer Short Name and the date timestamp of the time of production. This approach, as noted, requires that you have MS Outlook on board, and you must have entered your ATM's email addresses in the Appraisal Details panel. Of course, you can enter, add, or modify body text and email addresses, including CCs, etc., after this draft email comes up. The attached file is a single Excel worksheet. It has no button-operated functionality. Alternatively, you can create the same single date-time stamped worksheet saved to a subdirectory entitled Email Interview Questions that you can distribute any way you wish using this button labeled Create Distro Copy. You can look at the file later or now. You'll see it's the same as the file we saw attached to the MS Outlook email.